My box of Legions Imperialis has arrived, and I'm going to be starting off with the Space Marines and making them look all Blood Angels-y. So I pre-ordered my box of Legions Imperialis on pre-order day, and unfortunately it was a little bit delayed, but it finally arrived, and I cracked it open with some nervous anticipation. Now you might be wondering, why was I nervous? And that's because of all the things online where people have been talking about a disaster that they've had. Some pieces have been missing, lots of pieces broken, the rulebook printed upside down, which was one of my favourites, so I was a little bit worried about what I was potentially going to get or maybe not get in this box. Fortunately for me, everything was in there and nothing was broken apart from one little bayonet on the end of one of my Marines' guns, and my rulebook was printed the correct way, so for me, I was really lucky. The only thing that was slightly damaged was one of my whippy sticks. It's bent. But in fairness, we're probably not going to be using this for measuring, we're just going to be using it for, you know, some good old... Oh, such a satisfying sound, some good old whipping. So I tore through all the bits in there, and I decided I was going to start off with the Space Marines. And the idea behind this is that way I can compare it to my 3D printed stuff that I've already done and get some opposing forces for my Emperor's Children, which are the traitors. And I figured, because they're betraying Games Workshop by being 3D printed, all my 3D printed stuff can be traitors, and all of my stuff that I buy from Games Workshop can be loyalists. Kind of makes some weird kind of sense there. So the first thing I did is I decided to glue together the Warhounds. I don't know why I did this, it's a little bit crazy, and I'm really surprised by how many pieces it takes to make up things like the Warhounds, or for the tanks, for example. There's so many tiny little pieces, and I guess because I've been used to 3D printing these and they just come off in like a one piece and then you know, cure them up and then prime them, it just seems like crazy. But there's almost as many pieces for like the tanks that you'd get on like a full kit tank on 40k stuff. It's crazy. There's so much detail on these. So I got those glued together and then stuck on the bases, and then it was on to the Marines. Now, one of the great things about these sprues is pretty much all of the Marines are attached by just one little bit of plastic to the base. So only a few of them have some sprues attaching to like the shoulders and everything else, and they're all fully formed, so you don't need to stick them together apart from the rocket launchers. This makes priming and painting so much easier. So I kept pretty much everything on the sprues apart from the dreadnoughts. I popped those off and I glued them together, and then I just got to airbrushing. Now normally I'm the kind of person who cuts everything off the sprues, cleans them up, glues them together and then sticks them on the base, but because they're so tiny and if you want to be able to pick out all the details and everything, I figured I'd keep them all on the sprues. So with them all being on the sprues, I primed them all first and then I started to hit them with all the different colours. You're probably going to need some blue tack as well, because things like the dreadnoughts and the tanks, they're quite hard to hold on to, and they're relatively light as well, so if you go in there with an airbrush or a rattle can, for example, you're going to start getting them blown away. Now, just one consideration, and especially if you're using a rattle can, is take your time with this. Make sure your rattle can is at the correct temperature. Don't go crazy with it, give it some really light passes, because bear in mind, these are tiny, tiny little figures. And if you hit them with too much paint, you can gum up all those details and they're just going to look crap. So try to take your time with it, make sure you get everything right, and don't put too much paint on there. So I primed everything black, and I used two different steps. So for things like the Warhound and for my tanks, and also my dreadnoughts as well, I went for a really deep dark red. I'll have all the colours up on screen as well that I've used for this and over on my website, so you can follow along if you like to. But I went for a really deep dark red with those, and then I went for a mid red and then a high red. For the Marines, I kept it more simple, so obviously they started with black, and then I went for that mid-red and then the high red from, I guess, kind of all over. Once that was done, it was across onto the painting table. Now, in my opinion, when it comes to anything of this scale, less is more. You can go crazy. And one of the traps you might fall into if you are painting in the way that I've been painting here, keeping everything on the sprue, for example, is it's really, really easy just to really fixate on a lot of the details that aren't actually going to be visible when you stick them all together. When I've painted like my Emperor's Children stuff in the past, they've all been on one base, and it makes it hard to get to some of those details, but also you can't see those details, so it's not exactly an issue. When they're on the sprue, everything's really easy to see, it's easy to get to as well. So I very quickly found myself in the trap of just really spending a long time just putting extra details on these that were just never going to show up. In the end, I kept it really simple, so I think I stuck to like 3 different colours. There's some creams and whites on there, there's some blacks for all the weapons, and then just some touches of silver. There's a couple of other colours that are dotted around here and there, like the plasma pistols and the power swords. I gave them this really nice bright green, and then on the rocket launchers, I added a touch of yellow as well. And when it comes to the tanks and also the Warhound, I kept to the same sort of theme as well, just to keep everything unified. This makes things really easy because realistically, you only need like 4 or 5 colours to get everything done, and it just helps it when it comes to batch painting. My problem with this is I didn't stick with the Marines that were in the box. I also got a second box of Marines as well. So, you know, I was painting like hundreds of Space Marines And when you're doing that many things, even though I was batch painting, it was driving me crazy. So although batch painting makes sense when you're doing something like this, try not to do quite as many as I was doing because you can get bored very quickly. So if you've got the patience for it, go for it. But for me, it was driving me crazy, and I ended up doing sort of like 3 batches of Marines with one color, then moving on to something else, just so I could see some progress, because otherwise I was going to go crazy. Once I'd got all of my colors on there, I went back in with some Nuln Oil. At first, I was really precise where I was putting it, just to try and pick out some almost like panel lining, but at this scale it's really difficult to do. And as I got further into it, I got sloppier with it, and it didn't make too much of a difference. I'll probably go back in there and some like the command units and things like that. I'll dot them with some brighter reds just to pick out some of those details, but for the most part the Nuln Oil didn't wash it down too much. Once everything was painted up, it's time to snip them all off. And this bit should be really rewarding, and it kind of is, but then you've got to stick them all individually onto the base, and they're quite fiddly because the bases are really small, and then you've got to get them all like assembled and not knocking each other over. Oh, it took far longer than I thought it would. The rocket launchers, you've got to stick their little arms on as well, and it's just like this. I've got stupid, clumsy hands, and I should have used some kind of tweezers, but I didn't. I just persevered and tried to stick them all together. But then they were done, and I had loads and loads of Marines, a couple of tanks, and a Warhound as well. So the bases are all pretty basic at the moment. They're mostly just grey with a light dry brushing, so I probably will go back in there and do something a little bit fancier later on. I also need to rim all the bases black. There's a lot of bases right now, and the thought of that makes me kind of want to cry. So when I've decided what I'm going to do with those bases, I'll go back in there and finish them all up and make them look a bit fancier. So now they're all done, what are my thoughts on it? So I've already bought a lot more stuff for Legions Imperialis, so it's good that I actually like them. And I've got to say, for the most part, this box set and all the bits that come with it, they're actually really good. There's a couple of letdowns, for example, like the tokens. They're these awful paper tokens that are just not particularly up to scratch, especially since they're going to see so much playtime on the table. I wish they were better, and they just gave us something, I don't know, like thicker cardboard at least, but unfortunately not. Things like the tanks, the Warhounds, and most of the Space Marines look pretty good. But the basic infantry kind of look trash when you get really, really close. At this scale, you're going to be playing with them and having them on the table. You're not really going to notice too much. But when you are painting them, some of them have, I don't know, they're mutants. They've basically got arms that merge with legs and helmet pieces that merge with backpacks. There's a lot of stuff there where the quality just isn't what I'd expect. But also, I've got to be realistic. There's only so much they can do with the technology at the moment, and basically with the way that they're making these. Some of them, of course, aren't as good quality as my 3D prints, but that again is because of the technology that they're choosing to use. And although there might be some loss of quality on things like the basic Marines, they're going to give me a little bit more durability than something like my 3D prints. So there's trade-offs either way you go. All in all though, I'm mostly happy with the quality of these. The only ones that really stand out as being subpar are just the standard tactical Marines, but things like the Terminators, Assault Marines, and all the other stuff that's in the box that I've seen so far, I think it looks really, really good, and they've done a fantastic job. So I can't wait to get my first game of Legions Imperialis going. I've got so much printed off. I've got all things like the tokens, buildings, roads, but let me know, what do you want me to do next? So I picked up a Reaver Titan, I've got some Knights, I've got some planes, I've got all sorts of bits that I want to paint up, but let me know in the comments, what would you like me to try next? I might also have some cheeky little Xenos coming across into this in the form of Tyranids, just because, why not? It'd be a little bit fun. So I hope you've enjoyed that video. Let me know, are you collecting this game? What are your thoughts on it so far? And yeah, I'd be interested to hear what armies you're collecting, any tips you've got for painting these up, and what paint schemes you're going for. And in the meantime, if you want to support the channel, head on down to my description. You can find all my affiliate links in there. Anything you buy through those won't cost you any extra, but the channel gets a little bit of a kickback that helps me out. Also, I've got a Patreon page, a Discord as well, which you can come over and hang out and chat in there. And if none of those take your fancy, just a cheeky like or subscribe really goes a long way. So stay safe, see you in the next one. Bye.